For almost 30 years, Mark Hamill lived easy, thinking his days of waving around a magic space glow stick for a living were behind him. But then in 2012, during a Star Wars event, George Lucas took Hamill and Carrie Fisher aside and told them a new trilogy was happening, and if they didn't sign up, their characters would be written out. Immediately, the actor was filled with utter terror. He explained the sensation as feeling like he'd been drafted. And he's not exactly wrong. Whoever became responsible for Luke Skywalker being left out of the movie was basically committing suicide by angry nerd. Hamill, ever the kind farm boy, needed someone else to do the dirty work for him, someone like a brazen smuggler, perhaps. In an interview on the Nerdist podcast, he admitted that he was crossing his fingers and hoping that Harrison Ford would say no first, which seemed like a realistic possibility, given how much he freaking hates Han Solo. Unfortunately, director J.J. Abrams made the movie irresistible for Ford by offering to kill his character. And so Hamill accepted mostly out of politeness. The Force Awakens was a success, and he ended up being in it for like 10 seconds. Good luck on the next one, Mark. Hope it doesn't suck. Batman Forever may not be the greatest Batman movie, but there's a touching story hidden behind the scenes that almost makes it all worth it. It's the story of how Tommy Lee Jones loves his son more than he hates Jim Carrey. And he really hates Jim Carrey. After Tim Burton was kicked off the Batman movie franchise for not selling enough Penguin action figures, Warner Brothers brought in director and human strobe light Joel Schumacher. Schumacher's producer had become close with Jones while filming Under Siege and The Fugitive, and thought it would great to ruin his new best friend's reputation. He gave the script to Jones, whom he wanted to play Two-Face, but after reading it, the actor said he didn't get it. The producer replied with all the grace and diplomacy you'd expect from someone who'd made several Steven Seagal vehicles. Casablanca was set up to fail from the start. Hastily adapted from an unproduced play called Everybody Comes to Riggs, Jack Warner, of the Warner Brothers, had little hopes for its success. In order to make the best of a bad situation, they brought in director Michael Curtiz, who was not only an amazing filmmaker, but also the kind of maniacal workaholic who thought lunch breaks were for lazy people. And they were going to need a strict taskmaster to keep everything together, especially since the screenplay was in no way ready when they had to start filming and the two leads had the enthusiasm of a cat at bath time. Between a never-changing script and a never-shouting Curtiz, all Bogart and Bergman knew about Casablanca was that it was sloppy, with tons of bad dialogue and absurd situations. When actress Geraldine Fitzgerald took them to lunch, lazy, all they could do was talk about how to get out of the movie. This shit sandwich had literally killed their appetite. One of the more baffling aspects of the Hobbit trilogy was the out-of-place romantic rivalry between inexplicably hot dwarf Keely and beautiful mop Legolas over the affection of the elf Toriel. There seemed to be zero chemistry between all the actors involved, but there's a perfectly valid reason for that. None of them knew they were supposed to fancy each other until the movie was almost finished. When Evangeline Lilly was asked to play the role of Toriel, an elven warrior created specifically for the movies, she only had one demand: no love triangles. After being trapped in one for 6 seasons on Lost, she wanted nothing to do with that crap. The producers assured her that there was nothing like that in the script, so Lilly signed on to the films. Then, after an entire year of shooting, they informed Lilly that they needed some vital reshoots between herself and actors Aidan Turner and Orlando Bloom. Why? Oh, because instead of the mentor-mentee relationship with Legolas and a flirty competitiveness with the dwarf Keely, Toriel now had the high elven hots for these two dudes. When an interviewer once noted that Brad Pitt looked miserable throughout 1994's Interview with a Vampire, the actor responded, "I am miserable." You see, Pitt was excited about the movie at first, but didn't get his hands on the script until 2 weeks before shooting started, only to read that all the juicy bits had been given to Lestat, Tom Cruise's vampire. The screenwriter had butchered author Anne Rice's story, which was surprising, because the screenwriter was Rice herself. Plus, it didn't help that Rice hated Pitt's guts, publicly calling his and Cruise's casting the worst crime in the name of casting since Bonfire of the Vanities, the Batman v Superman of the early 90s. The work was tolerable at first, until the crew moved to Pinewood Studios, near London, in the dead of winter. According to Pitt, at Pinewood, his working day boiled down to wake up in darkness, go be sad and blink painfully in a drafty mausoleum, go back home in darkness. It was like working night shifts at the Louvre McDonald's. Famed pretend wizard in real-life secret agent Christopher Lee rose to fame playing Dracula in Hammer Film Productions, a London-based studio famed for their low-budget horror films. But after his third Dracula flick, Lee felt that the studio was just churning out movies. He famously had no dialogue at all in that film because, according to him, the lines they gave him sucked. Much to Lee's chagrin, the sequels barely gave him anything to do, as if the producers had figured out that Christopher Lee hanging out in a Dracula costume with fangs was terrifying enough. And sure, they were right. Christopher Lee could wear a Pikachu costume and still be terrifying. But that's not the point. When he finally announced he was quitting, Lee got a frantic call from Hammer co-founder Sir James Carruthers begging him not to abandon the studio. Apparently, they'd already sold the next movie to the distributor based on the promise of Lee's appearance. When that didn't work, Carruthers moved on to full-on emotional blackmail, saying, "Think of all the people you're putting out of work." That line worked on Lee, who admitted that he didn't want to be responsible for hundreds of people ending up on the street. So he wound up pumping out 4 more Dracula films for Hammer, which he did under protest, though you couldn't really tell, because glowering intensely was also part of his job. Marlon Brando has a long and storied past as one of the most difficult actors to work with in Hollywood history. But like all good villains, Brando has his origin story, a singular moment in which he tipped over from brilliant actor to every director's nightmare. That moment was 1954's Desiree, a movie most notable for providing Google images with pictures of Brando dressed as Napoleon. After winning an Oscar for On the Waterfront in 1954, Brando was the hottest ticket in town. 20th Century Fox managed to seduce the star into signing up for their upcoming big-budget epic The Egyptian. Brando loved the idea, until he read the script, which was terrible. Knowing now what a scar the movie would leave on his career, Brando did what any responsible adult would do. He snuck out of the studio lot, bought a fake mustache, and pretended to be a United Nations diplomat in order to escape to his apartment unnoticed.